Support for this NPR podcast and the following message come from Microsoft Teams, a digital workspace in Office 365, where teams can create, collaborate, and communicate authentically. Work, share, and connect with the people in your work life. Visit office.com/teams to learn more.
Hey everyone, it's Guy here. And before we start the show, I want to share some really exciting news because How I Built This is going live. We're going to be doing 3 interviews in front of live audiences in 3 different cities. And the first one is New York City on July 12th. I'll be talking with Jonah Peretti, the guy who founded BuzzFeed and the Huffington Post. For details on how to buy a ticket, you can go to nprpresents.org. And also listen out for details about live events later in the summer coming to San Francisco and Seattle. We would love to see you there and get a chance to meet. Okay, here is the show.
The manufacturer that I had started with didn't have a depth of manufacturing experience in kind of product that I was bringing, which is this product has to be very durable. And so one of the very early large lots of inventory we ordered arrived, and we'd sold out of everything, so of course we were out of stock by the time it arrived and desperate to ship. Well, we hooked up the first suspension trainer, leaned back, and the handles just cracked like potato chips.
From NPR, it's How I Built This, a show about innovators, entrepreneurs, idealists, and the stories behind the movements they built. I'm Guy Raz, and on the show today, how a former Navy SEAL turned an old jiu-jitsu belt into a new fitness phenomenon called TRX, then nearly lost it all when copycats ripped off his idea. It's unlikely you'll find a gym in America, or for that matter, in most parts of the world, without TRX straps. And if you're not familiar with them, they're these heavy-duty nylon straps that hang from an anchor in the ceiling with these foam rubber grips at the ends. And with these simple straps, you can do rows or lunges or push-ups or pull-ups. You can slip your feet into these loops at the bottom and work on your core or your legs. TRX is like a full-body workout machine, and yes, it is just 2 straps hanging from an anchor in the ceiling. The company says that today, more than 25,000 gyms have them, and something like 95% of all professional sports teams in the U.S. use them. And what's amazing about the concept is that the inventor and founder of the company, Randy Hetrick, literally needed something to help him stay fit during long deployments as a Navy SEAL. This was back in 1997, and at the time, Randy and his SEAL team were on a mission to find pirates in Southeast Asia.
We were in a little warehouse, kind of waiting to see, what was going to happen, and a day turned into a week, turned into a couple weeks, and you don't really have a good way to train other than the stuff that the Romans did in the way back, push-ups and squats and sit-ups, and none of that gets you really prepared to climb the side of a freighter with, 80 pounds of gear on your back. And I had accidentally deployed with my jiu-jitsu belt stuffed into my bag. I'd scooped it up off my cage, with a flight suit and thrown it into a bag without realizing I had it. And as I was sitting there on this cot listening to guys gripe about not being able to work out, I just got this idea that, hey, I wonder if I went and tied a knot in the end of this silly belt that I deployed here with, threw it over the top of that door over there. What if I could lean back and then pull my body up? And I just kind of created this movement that looked a lot like climbing a ladder, and then figured out how to use my body weight to load it up. And that was the spark of inspiration.
And you just found some doors in this warehouse to connect it to?
The first one was actually a bathroom door. And I just tied a knot in the end of it, threw it over the top of the door, closed the door, and then leaned back and started to lift my body weight against gravity, which turns out to be pretty effective and pretty versatile.
So you were grabbing the ends of this jiu-jitsu belt and just doing pull-ups and things like that?
Yeah, imagine that you had something that looks like an upside-down Y, right? An anchor end that goes up over the top of the door, and then kind of 2 arms that come off of that, because I stitched the 2 pieces together with this hand awl that we would use to repair rubber boats with. and, just leaned back and grabbed each side and started figuring out, hey, wait a minute, I can do rows, I can do curls, I can do, shoulder flies. If I turn around and lean away from the door, I can work the whole front side of my body. I can do chest presses and chest flies, and, standing planks for my core, and then use it as a balance point to do squats and single leg squats and lunges. And it just kind of became like a flower that continued to open up and expose new petals, the more that I worked with it.
So when you started to like do these exercises in this warehouse, waiting for a mission to begin, what do the other members of the SEAL team think about it?
Well, I mean, you got to realize it's a group of it's a pack of alpha males. So the first thing they do is come over and mock you, right, and say, "What the heck's going on over here?" But then very quickly, SEALs are innovative cats, and when it comes to exercise, everybody's sort of interested, and so literally, guys started going, "Hey, wait a minute, let me try that. Let me see, could we do this and could we do this?" And over the course of the next maybe 3-6 months, I just kept tweaking it. And, guys would have ideas on, hey, maybe we should put loops in the end of it. And it advanced at some level, but then it kind of froze at the level that I thought it needed to be, because I never viewed this, I wasn't thinking about business. I just thought it was kind of cool that I'd created this nifty tool that guys, liked and wanted. And so I had a friend who was a parachute rigger out in the Paraloft who started making them for guys in exchange for a case of beer. And he'd call me and say, hey, boss, Jones wants me to make one of your gizmos. Is that okay? And I'd say, yeah, go for it. And over the course of a couple of years, it just kind of proliferated within that unit.
So when did you start to think, hey, maybe I can do something with this?
Well, I was promoted out of the field, and at that point, my wife was sort of done with the superhero, gone all the time lifestyle, and had a promotion out to the West Coast in her career. And so we kind of cut a deal that I would apply to business school at Stanford, and if I got in, then I would resign my commission and move out there. And I thought that was, at that point, the safest bet on earth, because I hadn't had math in 25 years, and I wasn't very good at it even back then. But to my astonishment, they took me in spite of my scores.
And this is around 2001?
Yeah. And I went out there, and while I was at Stanford, I was able to go out and train in the athlete training center, and I would show up with my straps and hook them up, in this world-class training facility. And over the course of 6 or 8 months, I mean, darn near every one of the coaches that would be in there with their teams came over and sort of looked and said, hey, tell me about this thing, and 10 minutes later, they'd be selling me on what a great idea it would be for their every one of their athletes, from a 90-pound female tennis players to their 300-pound linemen. And that was when I started to think, I wonder.
I wonder if I could do something with this?
Yep. And I ended up deciding to take the summer between my first and second year, and instead of going off and doing some cushy, paying internship with McKinsey, I bought a $50 40-year-old sewing machine off of Geary Street, some little old sewing shop, and sat down in my garage. Mm-hmm. I knew how to sew, because as a young SEAL officer, you had to go out and, buy a case of beer for the rigger and have him teach you how to sew so you could customize your gear. And so I had some rudimentary sewing skills, and I just, started creating some different versions of the prototypes and optimizing the design.
And what were you making it out of at that time?
Nylon, Cordura nylon that I would buy bits of hardware that I needed and, put the thing together.
And so that summer, you were just basically sewing up a bunch of different versions of it, or you were just making the same thing over and over and over again?
No, I probably did 50 different versions. And it seems funny, right, when you think, well, the thing's just a darn strap. But there's a lot of different ways you can make a strap, it turns out. And, I'd make it, and I'd try it out, and then I'd think, all right, that's a little better. But that caused some unintended consequence that I don't like, so I'd work around that. And I didn't have any money. So, I probably spent, a third as much time with a razor blade in my hand stripping the pieces back apart so that I didn't have to, reorder them as I did sewing them together. But over time, you sort of work out the kinks, and by the time that I got to my second year in business school, I had a stabilized prototype And I also, during that summer, I had gone over and found a guy over in Hong Kong, a manufacturing rep, who would make a short lot for me of alpha prototypes.
So you get through that summer and you get back to school in the fall. And what did you do? Did you bring it to classmates at business school and say, hey, try this out? Or how are you then testing it?
I became, a bit of a fanatic with my idea. And I mean, anybody who was at Stanford Business School between 2001 and, 2004 will tell you, oh, yeah, I remember that cat. Because I snookered everybody in on every class project that got assigned. I turned into a incubator, if you will, for what would become TRX. And, we had events sometimes on Fridays, the blow off steam. They were called liquidity preference functions, which basically meant tapping a keg and hanging out together. And I would, bring out my straps and get people on them. And it was this great incubator where I learned all kinds of stuff. And it was one extended focus group that taught me a lot about, what people liked and didn't like about this contraption that I was proposing to sell.
So you graduate from Stanford, and what do you decide, I'm going to launch this thing?
Yeah, by that point I had my mindset that I was going to take a run at this, and I was a little old to be, a recent graduate of a business school program. I was the granddaddy of my class by about, 4 or 6 years.
Because you were, what,
36? Yeah, 36. And so I figured I had one opportunity to try and fail before I had to get serious about, a paying job. My mentors at Stanford at the time were trying to convince me to do something more sensible. And
they thought this was just a stupid idea?
Well, I mean, at the time, Garth Saloner was one of he ended up becoming the dean there. He was one of my professors, and he said, Randy, I can get you any number of great paying jobs in Silicon Valley with your background. Don't do this. And but I sort of had my head set on it, and so I got out and kind of went after it.
So how did you even have the money to start to manufacture these and to build a company?
Well, I didn't have any money because, my career as a government servant hadn't produced the giant pile of wealth that you would have hoped.
Yeah.
But I had about $50,000 in savings, and I put it all into kind of the first steps, the initial prototypes, and then pursuing a little bit of key intellectual property, which, thank goodness, became really important even recently.
What did you do? Did you just file a bunch of patents for this thing, for TRX?
There were some unique characteristics in those designs that I had created that I thought were really special and would fundamentally differentiate this product from what, if I was successful, I expected to be, a herd of copycats. And so I went and patented those unique features. And then I filed some trademarks on kind of the key terminology that I was going to try to build our brand around. And branding was one of the concepts that I really learned at Stanford.
So in 2005, when you launched the company, tell me how you started to get the word out about the system, because this was not, there wasn't anything really like it out there. So how did you get people to take you seriously?
Well, I think a lot of people didn't take me seriously initially, but I did it in sort of the least sexy way possible. I drove initially around Northern California in my car with my wingman Blueberry, my dog, in the passenger seat and a backpack full of straps. And I went gym to gym to gym to gym doing these little presentations to their staff of trainers. And I would usually have to, beg the fitness manager to give me a half hour of their weekly in-service with their staff, and then I would leave a couple of straps behind. I'll bet you that I did, in the first couple of years after business school, I probably did between 300 and 500 presentations around the country. And you would get the skeptics, for sure. A lot of the big dudes that, were used to throwing around a lot of weight, they would sort of look at me like, hey, what is this little girly machine that you've got here? But I would quickly disabuse them of the belief that it wasn't for them. And then after that, right, people would sort of be interested, and I would leave a couple behind. And it was just, one gym at a time, one trainer at a time, started to make a little progress.
And were you getting a lot of orders in that first year or first 2 years?
Well, I mean, a lot's a relative thing, right?
Yeah.
From 0, 10 is a lot. And so, yeah, I started to get what I viewed as a lot. It was signs of life, and I was fulfilling them out of this really kind of pathetic little, almost a shed that I was renting out in the western edge of the Sunset District in San Francisco. And I would, I was everything. I would fulfill them. I had a little inkjet printer and was running the, quote unquote, the enterprise software out of a desktop at my feet. And then, then I met a gal who was a waitress by night, but would help me with office stuff by day. And we just started to plug away and ship out of everything happened out of that little 1,500 square foot shop out in the Sunset.
What was a turning point? When did you start to feel like this thing is taking off? What happened?
Well, it's funny. You hear people talk about tipping points. My experience is a little different. I think it's kind of a series of tipping points that, they get relatively bigger if you're fortunate over time. But one of the early ones was I went down to a trade show down in San Diego called the Idea World Fitness Convention. And I set up a 10 by 10 booth down there, and I had this kind of fake door that I had put together and to anchor it. And we ended up selling out of everything we had.
Wow.
And I had to have my assistant overnight me, what we had left in the shop there. So the second day of the show was a 3-day show. The second day I was basically selling paper futures. And then thank goodness the product arrived on the third day and the people could come and exchange their paper for straps. And that was a big moment because I realized, all right, these trainers are a skeptical lot. But if they think this is really a great thing, all right, now I'm cooking with some gas, and so that was kind of tipping point one. And then shortly thereafter, I started to get exposed to some athletes and ended up connecting with a cat that probably most of your listeners have heard of named Drew Brees very early in his career.
So before he became the Super Bowl champion quarterback for the Saints.
Before he became the Drew Brees that we all know today. I mean, he was the same guy then, but you just didn't know about him. And he had just torn his rotator cuff in his throwing shoulder, which for quarterbacks tends to be a career ender. And he had just been released from the Chargers and was doing rehab. And he fell in love with a suspension trainer.
Wow.
Thank goodness.
And so was that what started to get a lot of attention for the system?
Well, he ended up, when he went to New Orleans, he ended up saying to me, hey, Randy, give me, half dozen of these and I'll take them with me. And, I'll see if I can get the Saints to start training on them. And he had an opportunity with Sports Illustrated early on to do a story about his comeback, and he was very kind and, just to sort of scratch my back, made sure that the picture that they featured was him training on the suspension trainer.
Huh.
And all of a sudden, all the strength and conditioning coaches and athletes that read Sports Illustrated got their eyes on this crazy strap and thought, well, maybe we got to have a couple of those. The big challenge for somebody who's starting a venture, and particularly if you've got a product for which there isn't precedent, the big challenge is obscurity, and trying to get out of obscurity and get up on the radar when you don't have much money is very challenging. And at first you think that's, once we break out, it'll just all be duck soup from that point forward. And I was envisioning, napping on piles of $100 bills. But it didn't quite work out that way because as soon as you start to hit scale, then a whole other host of challenges begins to avail themselves, and you have to wrangle each one at a time.
Like what, for example?
Well, one of the specific challenges that I faced early was the manufacturer that I had started with, who was a good guy, but didn't have a depth of manufacturing experience in kind of product that I was bringing, which is this product has to be very durable. And so one of the very early large lots of inventory we ordered arrived, and we'd sold out of everything. So of course we were out of stock by the time it arrived and desperate to ship. Well, we hooked up the first suspension trainer, leaned back, and the handles just cracked like potato chips. And it turns out that this manufacturer had gone to a sub-manufacturer and found somebody who would do the subcomponents more cheaply and hadn't mentioned this. And we didn't have time to send this stuff back. And so we ended up having to manually strip these things apart, set up basically an assembly line, with a bandsaw, went and got a bunch of plumbing pipe from Home Depot and literally had to set up this little, manufacturing plant, if you will, in our little office there. And that was inefficient, to say the least. But we managed to work our way through and survived it. But I had several product problems like that came from a manufacturer trying to improve his margins. And, this is something that in the manufacturing world, people call quality fade. And it's a big problem when you manufacture through China.
So you have this product out in the world, and I would think that once you start to become successful, there would be knockoffs. I mean, there would be other companies that thought, oh, well, we can just crush this guy because we can just make a similar thing and make it cheaper or whatever.
Yeah, that is the single biggest problem that I have faced in my career as an entrepreneur. And frankly, it's a problem that is bedeviling, the entire consumer product space these days. It started with us literally about 6 or 7 years into our evolution. I had somebody call me and say, hey, I think I just saw a counterfeit TRX. And I said, that's impossible. That's impossible, right? And it turned out that, in fact, the rise of the internet was changing everything. And it was creating an environment in which these little manufacturers over in, rural China suddenly had visibility over products that seemed to be hot. So if you have a one-size-fits-all, say, for instance, a Gucci bag or a Louis Vuitton bag that has a high sale price but the perception of a low cost of goods, you end up being a perfect target. And we had an explosion of counterfeiting that just rolled across the market and really threatened to cause us to fail.
Coming up, how the legal battle against copycats buried Randy in bills and almost sank the company. You're listening to How I Built This from NPR. Stay with us.
Support for this podcast and the following message come from U.S. Bank, a company that believes in doing the right thing. In fact, U.S. Bank has been named one of the world's most ethical companies 4 years in a row by the Ethisphere Institute. More at usbank.com/newsroom. U.S. Bank, the power of possible. World's most ethical companies and Ethisphere names and marks are registered trademarks of Ethisphere LLC. Equal housing lender. Member FDIC. Support for NPR and the following message come from City National Bank, working to help businesses, entrepreneurs, and their families on the way up for over 60 years. Visit cnb.com to learn more. City National, the official bank of the 2018 Tony Awards.
Hey, welcome back to How I Built This from NPR. I'm Guy Raz. So it's around 2010, and TRX is catching on with professional athletes and spreading to gyms across the country. The problem is, the exercise straps are also popular with counterfeiters, and the knockoffs are eating into the company's bottom line. So Randy decides to hire an investigator to figure out just how many counterfeiters are out there.
And they found about 20 different factories scattered around China that were all creating fake, counterfeit TRX suspension trainers.
Wow.
And yeah, it was a shock, and it put huge pressure on the entire business model, right? Because if you have distributors, they're trying to sell the authentic product at full price, but then they've got these kind of shadowy operators that pop up all around them, and the internet, enables this in a way that past generations of entrepreneurs never had to deal with. And so pretty soon, they're everywhere. And figuring out how to wrangle that was job number one.
So what did you do? How did you quash these guys who were eating into your business?
They were devouring my business.
Wow.
The stories are legend of companies that, had great promising futures that basically went out of business because of counterfeiting. I think that I was fortunate in that it was the early stages where people were starting, on the enforcement side, were starting to get a sense that, hey, this counterfeiting business is bad and we're going to have to do something about it. So customs was starting to ramp up its efforts. And fortunately, counterfeiting, is a felony. So when you identify them, everyone wants to take them down. And so we started this process of seizures in China with the cooperation at some level with Chinese police. And then in the States and in Europe, most of the customs agencies would seize the counterfeit goods. So that sort of started to subside. But what replaced it was that the counterfeiters figured out, if we don't put this brand's trademark on our product and we just copy the actual design itself but without the trademark, then it's technically not a counterfeit, and so it becomes much harder to enforce against. And that was the next big wave, was the knockoffs that were copying our designs to the T, but not calling themselves TRX. And that even became a bigger problem.
Well, how? What happened?
Well, Amazon and the other online marketplaces, but particularly Amazon because of its scale, became this hotbed, if you will, an auction site for all of these knockoff vendors who would misappropriate our trademarks, use them in search marketing. And so when you, for instance, Guy, came looking for TRX on Amazon, you would be served up our product alongside a host
bunch
of others that are a quarter the price, a fifth the price, because, of course, they're not having to spend any money to develop the market or get you there.
Yeah.
We really experienced a flattening and actually a negative growth for a couple of years, 2014 and 2015,
Wow.
as this sea of knockoffs confused the market.
I mean, look, you are an alpha male, you were a SEAL, you're a manly guy, but I mean, let's be honest. There's no way you didn't experience anxiety or depression or, fear.
All of that. All of that. Maybe even a few tears, Guy. I'm not above admitting that. It's because look, there was a period of time when I was thinking, well, I could make these guys go away, right? I have a certain skill set, but then you have to look away from the light quickly and say, no, this is not where your brain should go. I learned some skills as a SEAL about how to manage fear and stress, and it sort of involves a combination of compartmentalization and action. And so that's how I kind of, deal with entrepreneurial fear and stress is, you put it in a box, figure out how you can take action on it, and then you move forward to your next task at hand and hope that, that fix works.
So at that point, what did you do?
Ultimately, we decided that we had to take the dreaded step of our first litigation action, and we picked one of these knockoffs to go after with a federal patent and trademark infringement suit, because we knew that if we won, it was unlikely that we would be able to collect any significant damages because these knockoff companies don't tend to maintain a bunch of cash on hand. But we knew that as a legal precedent, it could be what we needed to clean up the marketplace. And so we filed a federal patent suit and trademark suit against one of the largest infringers.
So that's a big pain because that requires lawyers and paying lawyers for their hourly billing rates. I mean, that's super expensive. I mean, that must have been stressful just to do that.
It was really painful and quite scary. It was, just to frame it up, the rule of thumb is that it takes about $50,000 to file a patent, right? Mm-hmm. But the absolute minimum that one should expect when you try to enforce it is $500,000. I mean, that's if you settle, right, before court. We ended up, in our action, spending about $2.5 million, and it took about 3 years.
Wow. It's so interesting because I suspect a lot of counterfeiters or cheaters they know that an entrepreneur, especially one who may be doing well but not, a billionaire, is going to be disincentivized to fight them because the cost of the legal battle is so expensive. I mean, the lawyers' fees are so high and it takes so long that probably a lot of people, a lot of entrepreneurs just deal with it. They just live with all these cheaters.
That is exactly what happens. And, a lot of times it ends up being the death knell for the innovator. Because it sucks. I talk a lot when I talk to entrepreneur groups. I talk a lot about one of the most important things that an entrepreneur can bring to the table is his or her mojo, right? And Wikipedia, the font of all knowledge, defines mojo as magical powers. I think it's a little more than that. It's that kind of belief in the mission and that appreciation for the possibilities that lie just around the next corner, right? That is like the stuff of entrepreneurship. And one of the things that happens is, these cheaters come in and they create competition before you can really manage competition or afford it. And then they create legal fees, and all of that stuff is like cuts in that bag of mojo, and it just starts to leak out, right? And a lot of times it just causes an entrepreneur ultimately to say, heck with it, I'm just worn down, and they walk away.
What happened with that lawsuit? You filed the lawsuit, and 3 years, and what happened?
So 3 years. I mean, it was relatively recently that we got the final verdict, but we got a unanimous verdict. We had a jury award of $6.8 million in damages, which is quite something. It implies, I don't know, something like 22 to 25 million in lost sales, and what it created was the precedent that validated all of our trademarks and our key patents. And the jury verdict ended up also allowing Amazon to take action on all of these infringers. And so, it's a very happy outcome.
Yeah.
Our business almost immediately leapt up by 40% year over year and seems to be growing rapidly.
I mean, I know you're still a privately held company, and I've seen reports of revenues exceeding $50 million, maybe higher now. Am I right? Is it higher now, or
yeah? We'll be a little north of that this year.
But I'm wondering about your revenue streams. I mean, is it mainly from the TRX products, or do you also? Is there a revenue stream from training? I mean, for example, if you train a personal trainer on TRX and then that trainer uses that, you guys aren't getting any revenue from that trainer's work for the rest of his or her career, right?
Well, we're not getting revenue from that individual trainer's work, but we are monetizing the training. So, it used to be, I mean, in the way back, we were 100% gear, right? The revenue came from 100% gear sales. It's maybe 70-30. And I think pretty quickly will be 60-40, 60 being gear still and 40 being the soft goods in the form of education revenues and then digital content. So we've become a digital content company.
Do you mean you can download videos or buy videos or things like that
Correct.
Online?
Yeah, through apps, in-app purchases, et cetera.
So, okay, here's my big question about TRX, which is I've used them. They're really, really cool. It's a very simple idea and concept and very effective. But, I mean, this is still a field where trends come and go, right? Like there was a time where Pilates is really big and Bar 3 and yoga. I mean, things stay and things come and things go and jazzercise. I mean, it's all aerobics, all kinds of things. I mean, what's the guarantee that people are going to want to use TRX in 5 or 10 years?
I think that, I mean, first of all, if we're a trend, we're a fairly long-lived trend at this point, right? We've been around now for 12, 13 years and are growing strongly. But I think that one of the things that has been unique about the company that my team has built is that we created both in our hero product, right, the TRX suspension trainer, we became Switzerland. And by that I mean whatever else it is that you do for your exercise, we want to be a part of that. And we've been very successful at embedding ourselves. I mean, just about every one of the activities that you mentioned a minute ago, TRX has become part of.
Randy, I've read a lot about you, and I've read what some of the people who've worked with you have said about you, and most all of them have just like talked about your charisma and your drive and your passion. And I'm gonna read a quote that somebody said about you. I think it's a positive quote. It's critical, but it's positive. I'm curious to hear your reaction to it. And this is what one of your former employees said. He said, or she said, the company's initial success was driven by Randy's charisma and ego in a good way. People would live and die for him. But the same charisma and ego that allowed the company to grow from his garage to a high-rise in downtown San Francisco is what has gotten him into trouble. It became hubristic, and it's literally killing the company. That quote came out a few years ago. But you've seen that quote, I'm sure. What did you think when you saw that? Did it hurt your feelings? Did you think there was some truth to it? Or was it just completely off base?
Well, I think that I mean, obviously, I'm not going to agree with the quote, word for word. I think that there's probably some truth in it. In that, look, when you're an entrepreneur and you're trying to build something from scratch, you got to have a ton of faith in your idea, and you have to be headstrong, because if you're not, you won't survive. And as you start to scale, there's a lot of things that happen to a business. And one of the things that I realized is that communication becomes really the hardest challenge to conquer. Your team grows large. You have people scattered around various geographies. And I think that, there are different levels of understanding within the team sometimes about what's affecting a business. And so, yeah, there was a period of time where I think we got a little big for our britches. And as the leader of the organization, I certainly own that. But I wouldn't call it ego. I would call it more, I guess, strength of will, right? You have a level of conviction that there's some significant amount of hope behind. And that's how you sort of keep, the team focused on the realm of the possible and the opportunity that's just around the next corner.
When you think about where this company's headed and your role in it, I mean, what do you think? Is this going to be your life's work? Is this what you want to do for the rest of your life? Because you're not an old guy. I mean, you can do something else if you wanted to. You can create something entirely new.
I suppose old is a relative. It's in the eye of the beholder, right? I mean, it's funny to be in 51. I remember as a young SEAL pup looking at the admirals and thinking, God, those guys are old as dirt. And, one of my best friends is Admiral Tim Zemansky, who now heads the organization down there. And he doesn't seem old to me at all now.
Right.
But I really love starting things. I love that entrepreneurial energy of putting a team together and tackling big problems and seeing the progress and surmounting the challenges. I love that. And we still have plenty of that going on at TRX. I mean, we aim to become the world's first great multi-domain training brand, and nobody's ever done it. And so I think that, I don't have any plans to go anywhere other than keep growing, keep doing what we're doing.
Are you at a place now where you can kind of take a breath and say, okay, we're good. We've made it, and we're going to be just fine?
Not yet, but I think I can see it from where I stand.
Randy Hetrick, founder of TRX. By the way, if you always wanted to have a gym in your hotel room complete with TRX straps, well, your dreams may soon be answered. Hilton Hotels is about to roll out a concept, a hotel room with a gym inside, and of course, TRX straps hanging from the ceiling. And please do stick around, because in just a moment, we're going to hear from you about the things you're building. But first, a quick thanks to one of our sponsors, Pitney Bowes. Pitney Bowes provides technology that helps retailers turn U.S. online businesses into global ones. Today, our global e-commerce solutions enable retailers to sell online in 220 countries and territories. Pitney Bowes, the craftsman of commerce. Visit pitneybowes.com/craftsman. Hey, thanks for sticking around because it's time now for How You Built That. And our story today is about a business still in its very early stages. And it comes from Whitney Sokol in Boise, Idaho, who came up with her idea about 2 years ago when her son Beckham was a year old.
At that point, he'd outgrown or never even got to wear around 6 large containers worth of clothing. And between me and the gifts that we were given, I had thousands of dollars in clothing that rarely got worn more than once or twice, and sometimes not even at all.
So, yeah, and you may have been in this exact situation with a closet full of little onesies and leggings that pull apart with snaps. And by the way, parents actually love the snaps because they make changing a diaper really easy. But the thing is, they do not adjust to your growing baby.
You know, I had tried safety pins. I had tried ripping out the, elastic and rolling and unrolling. And so the wheels started turning, and I thought, gosh, wouldn't it be just great to have one piece of clothing that could fit and adjust up to 12 months?
So Whitney drew a sketch of what that garment could look like.
So instead of one row of snaps, I added an additional row.
So as your baby grows, you forget about the first row of snaps, you move on to the second row, and boom, suddenly there's more room in the onesie. But the problem was, Whitney had absolutely no background in design, which really hit her when she took her design to a seamstress in Boise.
She starts asking me, peppering me with technical questions about what kind of stitch, woven or knit, what fabric weight, what type of fabric. And I just felt my heart sink a little bit. Thinking, what are you doing? Stay in your lane. You don't sew.
To build up some confidence, Whitney enrolled in a 6-month fashion program, and she eventually found a seamstress to help her make a prototype. And then to launch a Kickstarter campaign, she thought, I know, I'll make a video at my house with a bunch of cute babies in it.
The night before the Kickstarter, I had everything planned out. And then the babies and the moms show up, and we are having to juggle and wipe tears and wipe backsides, and one mom's nursing, and absolute chaos had broken out in my house.
After several takes, Whitney did get some good footage of calm and happy babies modeling her red and navy expandable onesies and leggings. And then she raised $15,000 on Kickstarter and eventually found a factory in LA to fulfill those orders.
And they knocked it out of the park. I was so impressed. It was even better than I thought it would be.
That was just a few weeks ago, and now Whitney is sending out those first orders of onesies and leggings. She's got 2 sizes, 0 to 12 months and 1 to 2 years. Her company is called Sproutfit, and she's planning a second Kickstarter campaign very soon. And you can read more about Sproutfit on our Facebook page. Just search How I Built This on Facebook. And of course, if you want to tell us your story, go to build.npr.org. We love hearing what you're up to. And thanks also for listening to the show this week. If you want to find out more or listen to previous episodes, you can go to howibuiltthis.npr.org. You can also write us. It's hibt@npr.org. And if you want to send a tweet, it's @HowIBuiltThis. Our show is produced this week by Rund Abdel Fattah with original music composed by Ramteen Arablouei. Thanks also to Neva Grant, Sanaz Meshkinpour, Claire Breen, and Jeff Rogers. Our intern is Lawrence Wu. I'm Guy Raz, and you've been listening to How I Built This from NPR.
Hey, y'all. Sam Sanders here. These days, I feel like I can't make sense of the news until I've talked it out with my friends. So I made a new show where we do that every week. It's called It's Been a Minute. That's my way of saying let's catch up. Find It's Been a Minute now on the NPR One app or wherever you get your podcast. Thanks.